In this video series, we covered the biggest scandals involving top Formula One teams, such as Mercedes, Ferrari and world champion McLaren. Teams that, because of their winning position, at a certain point in their history, have had to go through the spotlight of scandal and controversy. And the teams with the most years in Formula One usually have a bit more of these stories. And this time it's about one of those historic teams that has been in Formula One for years and has achieved specifically 9 constructors titles and 7 drivers titles. So believe me, they've had more than one major scandal throughout their history. Ladies and gentlemen, Williams Racing is a team that was created and founded by Sir Frank Williams in 1977 after the failure of his previous project, which quickly achieved success and championships in this world of Formula One thanks to his enormous ambition, but whose legacy, besides having success, also has a few stains that will be featured in this dishonorable top list that we will see next. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the top 5 biggest scandals of the Williams Formula One team. For most Formula One teams, if one of their drivers wins the Drivers' Championship, it's one of the most important milestones in the category. It would be reason enough to secure that driver with a multi-year contract and a significant salary increase. But in 1996, this wasn't enough for Williams. And despite having won the Drivers' and Constructors' World Championships that season in a rather unusual way, they let their reigning world champion go, allowing him to take the number 1 to another rival team, ladies and gentlemen. The protagonist of this story, apart from the Williams team and Sir Frank Williams, obviously his name is Damon Hill, a driver who joined the team in 1993, with the explicit request to be the number 2 driver behind their recent signing, Alain Prost. A role Damon easily filled, but that changed drastically in 1994 when he had to lead the team after Ayrton Senna's sudden death. That season Hill did his best and in 1994 fought Michael Schumacher for the title. But he lost it in the season's final race at Adelaide, Australia, due to a highly controversial move by the German driver. Patrick Head said Hill was outstanding and worked well with the team. However, Patrick Head and Frank Williams never considered him a driver with exceptional abilities. And Damon Hill himself commented that he felt the team was constantly looking for another driver to replace him. Damon never liked it, always feeling a noose around his neck, despite having lived up to the high expectations after the death of the Brazilian star, and that feeling never improved or went away. In 1995, they were surpassed by the Benetton team and once again by Michael Schumacher, a year when Williams directly blamed him for being inconsistent and mentally less strong than Michael. But in 1996, things changed drastically. Williams had a car superior to their rivals, and Damon Hill comfortably beat his teammate Jacques Villeneuve, which by season's end became his first driver's title ever. This should have eased tensions between Williams and Hill, but beneath the surface things weren't as happy as they appeared. Since July 1996, Williams had planned to replace the driver leading his teammate by 25 points in the standings. He already had 6 wins that season, more than any other driver, that's the reason. They had signed German driver Heinz-Karl Frentzen without informing Hill they would release him for the 1997 season. And he ended up finding out through the press on the eve of the German Grand Prix due to a note from the Autosport publication, which became public at that Grand Prix. Damon at first didn't believe them and called them liars. Frank Williams told him a month later they were indeed removing him from the team. But besides that, the justification was quite strange, because according to Frank Williams himself, they fired him for what he did in 1995, and they didn't take into account what he was doing in 1996. Williams thought Hill would only win the World Championship because of his excellent car. He wasn't seen as an exceptional driver by the British brand. Also, Hill's representative requested an amount Williams found unfair, because Sir Frank believed that all the success Damon Hill was having in 1996 was thanks to his team. Williams signed Frentzen for 1997 while Damon Hill joined the Arrows team. But he took the number 1 with him for his new car and the title of World Drivers' Champion. In later years, Head, Williams and Damon had a good relationship. Hill always thanked them for the opportunity to be a Formula One driver and to become world champion. But for many people, the way Williams belittled his champion was quite unnecessary. But this was fairly common in Formula One's hostile world. Besides, Frank Williams was well known for not getting sentimental with practically any driver. So, in the number 5 spot of our top, Damon Hill's dismissal in the season when he was crowned Formula 1 World Champion. In the 80s and 90s, Williams always had at least one successful car. After being dominated by McLaren between 1988 and 1991, by 1992 Williams, thanks to the implementation of electronic aids, became the dominant force on the grid again, winning the Constructors and Drivers titles in 1992 with great ease thanks to the British Lion Nigel Mansell. And with a car like that, especially one so dominant, so superior, and so easy to drive, it's clear that any driver would give his soul to drive those cars. And it's there, right there, where we find the 4th place in our particular ranking. Obviously, all the Formula 1 superstars would want to drive that car, which until that moment belonged to Nigel Mansell and Riccardo Patrese. One of those interested was Ayrton Senna, who wanted to leave McLaren to join the team that looks set to be the dominant force on the grid for the coming years. Senna, it was a signing that made a lot of sense for the British team. He was a proven fast driver and maintained a good relationship with Nigel Mansell, despite their fierce 1991 title battle. In the 1S, there was another driver who also saw the potential of Williams and didn't want to spend another year watching from the sidelines. This driver was none other than Alain Prost, who, seeing the team's potential, wanted to have that car to make a triumphant return. Return to Category Y. At this point in the story, Riccardo Patrese was already expected to be dropped by Williams, meaning Nigel Mansell would theoretically be his teammate. But this is the first tense moment with the signing. And in 1990, Mansell and Williams became the Ferrari team. Mansell had a bad experience as his teammate, facing a situation where the team gave him everything. Alain Prost was a bad teammate to him. And there's a story where, even without telling Mansell himself, Ferrari took his chassis away to give it to the 3-time world champion. This was something that almost made him leave Formula 1 at the time because of the annoyance and frustration this situation was causing him. So Mansell felt that the hiring of Alain Prost was a betrayal and demanded to be paid an astronomical salary at that time. Or would he leave the team for 1994? Williams, as cold with his drivers as ever, simply and directly allowed Nigel to leave. Prost's signing was finalized and his participation for the 1993 season was confirmed, but now they had to find him a teammate after Nigel Mansell's resignation. Ayrton wanted that seat and to be his teammate. But one of the most controversial moments seen from this team came precisely at the time of the signing, with a small contractual clause. A clause where specifically Ayrton Senna would not be signed as Alain Prost's teammate for the 1993 season. The tension and rivalry between these two from 1988 to 1990 is extremely obvious. Senna learned about this clause, which prevented him from signing with the British team for the 1993 season as he wanted. Was he resigned to staying with McLaren? And at a press conference, quite upset about the situation, the Brazilian didn't hesitate to call his former teammate a coward, criticizing him for not wanting to compete equally again. For years, people believe Prost set this condition to sign his 1993 contract. However, many years later, Alain Prost defended himself against this accusation, confessing on a podcast called Beyond the Grid that he never asked for it. That clause that prevented Senna from signing with the Williams team, in fact, that clause had actually been Frank's own idea. To avoid repeating the toxic dynamic from McLaren in 1988 and 1989. He remarked that he did say he didn't want Senna as a teammate, but it was Williams who added that clause. Either way, Ayrton had to call Prost a coward again. A year later, he secured his contract to race with them in 1994, while Prost retired as Formula 1 world champion at the end of 1993. But the media frenzy that arose from this situation, with Mansell leaving the team and not wanting to work again, with Alain Prost and the veto against Ayrton Senna, the controversial and highly publicized signing of Alain Prost by Williams in 1993 becomes the 4th place in our tournament. In particular, Formula 1 is full of rivalries. Some go by unnoticed, but a few, just a very few, reach the status of truly legendary rivalries. But what if you bring in a driver and guarantee him top status? And on the other side of the garage, there's another driver with a much lower profile, but with a clear ambition to win, which quite simply gives you one of the fiercest and for some reason most underrated rivalries in the world of Formula One. Nigel Mansell and Nelson Piquet's rivalry was marked by scandals and controversies. They could easily fill this entire top list since from the very beginning of this duo, in 1986, that's when the controversies started. In this teammate battle, at this point, Nelson Piquet was a two-time world champion and regarded as one of the grid's best drivers, with rare, exceptional talent. For 1986, he wanted a winning car again, and Williams, known for their competitive single-seaters, could provide that. So Mansell, who had already been a member of the team since 1985, would be relegated to being the wingman, in a team that was very clear that having a number one driver and a wingman was the key to success in the category. But Piquet didn't expect what happened before the season began. Frank Williams, the one with whom he reached the agreement to join the team in 1986 and who verbally assured him that he would be the number one driver that season, suffered a serious accident that left him quadriplegic. And from that moment on, the team had to be led by Patrick Head, co-founder of the Williams organization. This allowed Nigel Mansell to challenge their star signing and as a result sparked one of the most spectacular rivalries in the history of Formula One. Piquet felt his agreement wasn't being respected. This sparked a hostile rivalry even before Senna versus Prost. This was considered the mother of all battles. Mansell and Piquet deeply hated each other, leading to several clashes, like the fierce duel at the 1986 British Grand Prix when Mansell won with Piquet's spare car, which was set up completely for him. Or, of course, when Piquet won the Hungarian Grand Prix thanks to the benefits it brought. A new differential that Piquet and his team completely hid from Nigel Mansell. This didn't reflect well on the Brazilian driver's sportsmanship at the time. Besides, he constantly insulted him, like when in an interview he said that Mansell was a rude arguer and also had a horrible wife. Or when he constantly called him stupid. And thanks to this fierce battle and this fierce confrontation, in 1986 both of them took themselves out with their battles and constant retirements. That for the last race of the season, Alain Prost from McLaren could take the title away from the men who had the fastest car on the grid. And thanks to a tire blowout from the British driver, when he had his first championship crown within reach, did exactly that happen to him, leaving the throne to the French driver from the rival Williams team? Which was obviously a cold shower for the whole team. Due to this internal dispute, they won the Constructors' Championship but still lost to another rival on the grid. Mansell also admitted that Piquet was not a good person and that he never had a good relationship with him. In an interview, he said, "He could be a good person, but he chooses not to." And this rivalry is full of moments like that. Controversial moments, statements that are absolute fire, scandals, controversies. In short, what happened between these two was one of the most intense rivalries ever seen in the history of Formula One. Mansell and Piquet had very different personalities. Mansell was much more serious, while Piquet was a true playboy on the grid. With this, we'll secure third place in the ranking. It's not that we don't want to discuss all the controversial moments in this rivalry, but we have a surprise for you in the future. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, the rivalry between Mansell and Piquet, the ongoing insults, battles, and how these rivalries developed. They take the bronze spot in our top Williams Formula One team scandals. In the previous spot, we told you that if there was something Sir Frank Williams liked, it was the dynamic of having a number one driver and a supporting driver, the formula he considered to be the key to success. And in 1981, Formula One witnessed what happens when a supporting driver rebels, deciding he no longer wants to be a number two driver. Our story begins in 1980, when Williams signed the duo of the Australian Alan Jones and the Argentine Carlos Reutemann. But for Frank Williams, it was very clear that the number one driver on his team was Alan Jones, and that Carlos had to be his supporting driver. He performed this role all year in 1980 without complaint. This let the Australian win his only Drivers' Championship and gave Williams its first Constructors' title ever, which ended up being the achievement of the 1981 Drivers' and Constructors' titles. Carlos wanted that driver's title now and he wasn't planning to wait another year, just being his wingman and watching as his teammate took all the glory. The problem was that being Jones's wingman was in Carlos Reutemann's contract, and breaking this particular clause would turn the whole team against him. But at the 1981 Brazilian Grand Prix, he was going to make his intentions to go all out that season completely clear. 07. The Jacarepaguá track would hold the second Formula 1 World Championship round notable for heavy rain. From the start, Lola passed Nelson Piquet's Brabham, with Jones third and Ricardo Patrese between them. So Lowell would lead that Grand Prix right from the start, thanks to his explosive getaway. But it wouldn't take Jones long to move up to second, right behind his Argentine teammate. That moment triggered the Grand Prix scandal for this team. Also, a garage war would not benefit the Argentine driver. In Reutemann's contract, it stated that if Carlos was ahead of Jones by a distance of 7 seconds, he had to let his teammate pass. That's how his supporting driver role was arranged. And with just a few laps to go, Williams ended up giving the order with a sign from the pit wall that said Jones up and Reut down. It was simply the order for Carlos to let his teammate pass. However, Carlos didn't slow down at any moment, and no matter how many times that sign was shown, Carlos simply disobeyed the team order. He never slowed down and ended up winning that race under the furious eyes of his teammate, who felt that their agreement was not being respected. And yes, he did take the victory and the points that he deserved, but this obviously would have consequences. Some that became immediately apparent when Jones didn't show up on the winner's podium, and Carlos went to collect his winner's prize alone, without anyone from his team showing up with him. There was a clear rift due to the Argentine driver's defiance. When asked why Lowell disobeyed the order, he said the rain kept him from seeing the sign. But many years later, he admitted that he saw the sign, he knew what it meant, and still decided not to obey it, aware this would eventually have consequences. These consequences were crucial for the Argentinian to lose the 1981 World Drivers' Championship. Not against Alan Jones, but Nelson Piquet Jr., as even some Argentinian journalists note, when the Brazilian took the title from him in the year's final race. At the Las Vegas circuit, there were people from the Williams team itself celebrating with Bernie Ecclestone and Nelson Piquet. We have a video in the War in the Box chapter that explains the Alan Jones and Carlos Reutemann battle much better. If you want to learn more about this story, please watch that video. But definitely, that race, Lowell's disobedience, and the way Williams treated him afterward make this controversy take the silver medal on this list of scandals involving the Williams Formula 1 team. By now, everyone knows what the biggest scandal in Williams team history is. It was always predictable, ever since the death of one of Formula 1's greatest legends. It has been not only the hardest thing Williams has ever had to go through in its entire history, but also its biggest and most publicized scandal. For over 40 years, this team has been on the Formula 1 grid, ladies and gentlemen. Obviously, the number one spot on this list is the death of Ayrton Senna, the tragic story of the Brazilian star's death on May 1, 1994 after crashing at the Tamburello curve of the Enzo Edino Ferrari circuit in Imola. But we've already told you that story several times on this channel. So for this spot, specifically in the top, we'll focus more on the aftermath. Because yes, everyone knows that Senna died in that tragic accident at the Tamburello curve due to a suspension bar that flew off and hit him directly on the helmet. Few people know the full legal process this team faced after the Brazilian star's death. To recap, Senna crashed at the Tamburello curve after a safety car restart during the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix. Due to a suspension bar that flew off after the accident and struck his helmet directly, the Brazilian driver lost his life as a result of that crash. After the accident, Italy's prosecutor's office charged the team's executives, Williams, under the charge of involuntary manslaughter, targeting 6 people, specifically Patrick Head, sporting director, Frank Williams, owner, and Adrian Newey, technical director of the Williams team. In addition to Roland Brunserati, the Federación Internacional del Automobile race director at the time, the Grand Prix organizer, Federico Bendinelli, and the director of the Imola circuit, Giorgio Poggi. The prosecutor, Mauricio Passeregni, later dropped charges against Frank Williams, Brunserati, Bendinelli, and Poggi after the process began, placing the full responsibility for Senna's death on Adrian Newey and Patrick Head. At that time, Williams had the car seized. During the investigation, they discovered that the accident was largely due to a break in the steering column, which, according to the prosecution, was poorly welded at the time and had cracks that caused it to break when the Brazilian was about to go through the Tamburello curve. And this weakness in the steering column was largely because Senna felt uncomfortable inside the car and wanted to lower the column to feel better with his driving position. Newey was in charge of making that modification, ordering a reduction of the column's diameter by 4 millimeters. According to the 600-page report by University of Bologna engineering professor Enrico Lorenzini, he confirmed that this column was worked on in a hurry before the race, and for that reason it was defective to the point that the race was seized. Paolo Camarota, part of the staff in charge of the analysis and investigation of the accident by the Italian authorities, emphasized that doing this was a design error, he stressed, because two different materials were used in its manufacture. This modification wore down the bar, causing the failure that led to the accident. Senna's accident. In the trials, the Italian prosecutor presented evidence from her investigation and supported her theory with Lombard's images of Senna before the accident. And during the following 3 years, both Williams and the Italian prosecutor had to face this legal process, where in December 1997 Patrick Head and Newey had been acquitted of the charges of manslaughter, arguing in their favor despite the car's steering column failure. Neither Patrick Head nor Adrian Newey were negligent in its manufacture. To prove it, Williams built the same bar on a test bench to show that it was strong enough, even if it had been weakened, as the prosecution was trying to prove. Years later, Newey admitted he never knew what caused Senna's accident, and it was never clear whether the steering column broke before the accident or afterwards from the impact. Williams defended themselves in court, arguing the accident's cause was unclear because of the safety car. Before the accident, the tires got too cold, and when Senna went through the corner, the lack of temperature caused the car to hit the ground on a bump in the track, lose aerodynamic downforce, and as a result, go straight into the wall. And the way the car lost grip at the rear, as shown by the videos and images of the accident, contradicted the prosecution's argument that the accident had been caused by a steering column failure. So it was impossible to prove if it failed before the accident or broke after the crash. As a result, Italian authorities gave their verdict, confirming the Williams staff's acquittals in 1999. By 2002, 8 years later, the team would acquire the single-seater with which Senna crashed on May 1, 1994. However, this story did not end here. In 2003, the Italian Supreme Court reopened the case, citing material errors by the Bologna Court of Appeals. After 2 more years of deliberations and trials, Newey was again acquitted of all charges. Although they tried to charge Patrick Head again, Italian law said his case had already expired. Still, in 2007 the legal process finally ended, with the Williams team and especially team director Patrick Head found responsible in 1994. Held liable for Ayrton Senna da Silva's involuntary manslaughter caused by a steering column failure, due to poorly designed modifications that, according to the Italian prosecutor's office, were predictable and avoidable. However, under Italian law, the crime expired 7 years and 6 months after the events occurred, and this verdict was given 13 years after the accident, so Head was not arrested. Despite this sentence, Senna's death not only brought Williams enormous grief, but also the eyes of the whole world, who blamed them directly for his death. They had to face accusations, all kinds of questions, and above all, a trial that took 13 long years to resolve. But where, definitely, that tragic 1994 San Marino Grand Prix is the worst stain in Williams team history, and also its biggest scandal, which today, 31 years after the incident, is still the biggest scandal in the history of this team, one of the biggest in the history of Formula 1, and of course, the gold medal of our list, particularly of scandals and controversies involving the Williams Formula 1 team. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes another chapter of our mini-series, this time focusing on the Williams team. So, do you agree with this list? Would you add another scandal? Would you remove any or rearrange this list? Let me know all your opinions in the comments section. Goodbye, and if you like this video, give us a thumbs up. Subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications so you know when I'm uploading a new video, and share this with your friends. Also, I invite you to follow us on these Instagram and Twitter accounts, the links to which will be in the description of this video. And I'll see you soon for more content here on your Skyline Racing channel. Thanks for tuning in. See you later.